Galaxian Empire stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Void Render, watching the small blue planet rotate peacefully in the view screen. His forearms crossed in what his species considered a gesture of supreme confidence, while his crystalline eyes gleamed with the anticipation of an easy conquest. The planet before him, designation Teroth Re, though the inhabitants called it Earth, appeared utterly defenseless. No orbital defense platforms, no energy shields, no massive battle stations. Just a primitive world with scattered metal objects floating in low orbit that their sensors identified as satellites. Pathetic, he chittered to his second-in-command. Sub-Admiral Vexstar, our scouts reported correctly. This world hasn't even achieved basic stellar defense capabilities. Look at those primitive vessels in their orbital space. They're made of simple alloys and carry no weapons systems we can detect. The Void Render was just one ship in a fleet of 300 vessels, each one capable of cracking a planet's crust with sustained bombardment. The Galaxian Empire had conquered 17 star systems in the past decade, each one falling within hours of their rival. This little blue world would be no different. Perhaps it would even surrender without a fight. Once they demonstrated their superiority, Zethkri's confidence was not unfounded. The Galaxians had perfected the art of rapid conquest through overwhelming force. Their ships were equipped with quantum disruptors that could tear apart molecular bonds, plasma cannons that could melt through any known armor, and shield generators that could deflect anything short of a supernova. More importantly, they had numbers: 300 warships, each crewed by elite warriors who had never known defeat. "Sir," reported Navigation Officer Clixra, her voice carrying the excitement of impending victory, "we're detecting primitive electromagnetic communications from the planet's surface. They appear to be trying to contact us. Let them speak," Zethkri commanded, settling into his command throne. "I want to hear their pleas for mercy before we begin the bombardment." The communications channel crackled to life, and a voice spoke in what their universal translators identified as the dominant language of the planet, something called English. The voice was calm, almost conversational, with an undertone that Zethkri's translator couldn't quite parse. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the United Earth Space Command, speaking on behalf of the Global Defense Council. We are aware of your fleet's presence in our system. We would like to offer you one opportunity to turn around and leave our space peacefully." The bridge of the Void Render erupted in chittering laughter. Even the usually stoic Vexstar allowed himself a brief moment of amusement. A single planet, with no visible defenses, was offering them a chance to retreat. The audacity was almost refreshing. "Respond to their transmission," Zethkri ordered, his voice dripping with condescension. "Tell them that the Galaxian Empire claims this world and all its inhabitants as property of the Emperor. They have one rotation of their planet to surrender unconditionally, or we will demonstrate why resistance is futile." The response came faster than expected, and this time, there was something in the human's voice that made Zethkri's translator work harder to interpret. The emotional undertones. "Admiral, I'm afraid we can't accept those terms, but I want to make something clear. We tried to warn you. What happens next isn't cruelty. It's just efficient. Zethkri's mandibles clicked in what passed for a smirk among his kind. "They speak of efficiency while facing the largest invasion fleet in this sector. Perhaps they don't understand the magnitude of their situation." He gestured to his tactical officer. "Lieutenant Kixamore, show them what efficiency looks like. Target their largest population center and prepare a demonstration strike. Something impressive, but not immediately lethal. I want them to understand their position." Lieutenant Kixamore's tentacles danced over his controls with practiced precision, targeting their settlement designated New York City. "Sir," plasma cannons charged and ready for demonstration strike. But as Kixamore's appendage moved toward the firing control, something extraordinary happened. The targeting computer suddenly displayed an error message that none of them had ever seen before. "Target not found." "What?" Kixamore's voice carried a note of confusion that was entirely foreign to Galaxian military protocol. Sir, the targeting system is malfunctioning. It's showing the city as not there." Zethkri's confidence wavered for the first time since entering the system. "Explain." "The sensors show the city was there 17 seconds ago." Now there's just empty space, no debris, no energy signatures, no traces of weapons fire. It's as if it never existed. Before Zethkri could respond, the human voice crackled through the communications system again, still maintaining that unsettling calm. Admiral, you were targeting New York City. We've moved it to a safer location about 47 light-years away, in the Kepler 440 system. The 11 million inhabitants are perfectly safe, though they're probably wondering why their morning coffee tastes different under a red dwarf star. The bridge fell silent except for the hum of the ship's systems, moving an entire city 11 million beings across interstellar space instantaneously. Was beyond even theoretical Galaxian technology. It would require energy expenditure equivalent to their entire fleet's power output for a year, and that was assuming they could even figure out how to do it. Impossible, Vexstar whispered, his usual composure cracking. Sir, they're bluffing. They must have some kind of cloaking technology. But even as he spoke, more cities were disappearing from their sensors. London, Tokyo, Sydney, Delhi, each one vanishing without a trace, leaving behind only empty geography. The humans weren't just moving their population centers. They were doing it faster than the Galaxians could target them. Zethkri's forearms began to tremble, slightly a physiological response his species experienced when confronted with the incomprehensible. Weapons officer, target their planetary surface directly. If they can move their cities, we'll destroy the entire planet. Sir, I'm trying. But the weapons officer's voice broke off in a strangled sound that was part confusion, part terror. Sir, the planet is gone. Every eye on the bridge turned to the main view screen, where moments before the blue world had been rotating peacefully. Now there was nothing but empty space, not even the gravitational effects that should have remained. After such a massive object's displacement, the human voice spoke again. And this time, there was something almost apologetic in its tone. We've relocated Earth to a nice quiet spot in the Andromeda Galaxy. The view of the galactic core is spectacular, and the neighbors are much more peaceful. We left your fleet some breathing room, though wouldn't want you to get caught in any gravitational anomalies. Admiral Zethkri felt his world, his understanding of reality itself beginning to collapse. In 30 years of military service, he had never encountered technology that could relocate an entire planet instantly, much less do it with such casual ease, that the operators could maintain conversational small talk while performing the impossible. How? He managed to whisper into the communications system. Oh, that's a fair question. The human replied, and there was genuine warmth in her voice now. You see, Admiral, your intelligence was correct about one thing: we haven't developed stellar defense technology. We never needed to. We took a different approach to security about 50 years ago, after we realized that the universe was probably full of civilizations like yours. The view screen shifted to show what appeared to be a perfectly ordinary human female, sitting in what looked like a simple command center. She wore a blue uniform with insignia that seemed almost quaint compared to the ornate battle dress of Galaxian officers. We discovered something interesting about consciousness and quantum mechanics. Admiral Chen continued, leaning forward slightly in her chair. It turns out that reality is far more flexible than most species realize. When you have 8 billion minds all agreeing on what should happen, and the computational power to coordinate their intent precisely, you can accomplish things that might seem impossible to civilizations that rely purely on technology. Zethkri felt his legs giving out beneath him, and he collapsed into his command throne. You're saying your entire population is, what, collectively, willing things to happen? Not exactly willing, Chen corrected gently. More like editing. We've learned to treat spacetime like a very sophisticated computer program, and when you understand the source code, you can make modifications. The implications crashed over Zethkri like a tidal wave. If the humans could relocate planets instantly, what else were they capable of? Could they relocate his fleet? Could they edit his ships out of existence entirely? As if reading his thoughts, Chen's expression grew more serious. Admiral, I want you to understand something important. We moved Earth and our cities to keep them safe, but we haven't harmed a single member of your crew. We don't want to hurt anyone, but you came here with the intention of conquering and enslaving our people. And that's something we simply cannot allow." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "You have for minutes and 37 seconds to begin your withdrawal from this system. If you don't, we'll be forced to take more direct action." "What kind of direct action?" Zefkri asked, though part of him didn't want to know the answer. Chen's smile was both kind and terrifying. "We'll edit your fleet's existence down to something more manageable. Maybe 3 ships instead of 300. Maybe toy models instead of warships. Maybe we'll just relocate you to a universe where the laws of physics are slightly different, nothing harmful, just inconvenient enough to discourage future invasions." The Bridge of the Void render had become a monument to stunned silence. 300 ships, each one capable of destroying worlds, rendered utterly helpless by an enemy that didn't even consider them a threat worth destroying. "For minutes and 18 seconds, Admiral," Chen reminded him gently. For the first time in his life, Admiral Zefkri of the Calaxian Empire gave the order to retreat. The evacuation order had barely left Zefkri's mandibles when the universe around them began to shift. It wasn't violent or dramatic. There were no explosions, no energy discharges, no signs of conventional weapons. Instead, reality seemed to hiccup, like a glitch in a vast cosmic program being corrected by an unseen administrator. Sub-Admiral Vexstar was the first to notice, "Sir." His voice carried an edge of panic that violated every principle of Calaxian military discipline. "The fleet count is showing irregularities." Zefkri's eyes snapped to the tactical display, where the fleet roster was updating in real time. The numbers were wrong, catastrophically wrong. Where moments before 300 vessels had been preparing for withdrawal, now only 30 ships remained on the sensors, not destroyed, not damaged, simply absent. "Where are the other ships?" Zefkri demanded, his voice cracking across multiple frequencies. "Unknown, sir," Tactical Officer Kixamore replied, his tentacles trembling. As they worked his controls, "They're not showing as destroyed or disabled. According to our sensors, they never existed. The computer logs show we arrived with 30 ships, not 300. Admiral Chen's voice drifted through the communication system, still maintaining that infuriating calm. "I'm afraid we had to make some adjustments to your fleet composition. Admiral, don't worry, the other ships and their crews are perfectly safe. We've relocated them to a peaceful dimension where they can contemplate the ethical implications of interstellar conquest without the pressure of military command." The bridge erupted in confused chittering as the implications sank in. The humans hadn't just moved objects through space, they had edited the very fabric of reality, retroactively changing the past so that most of the fleet had never arrived in the first place. "This is impossible," Vexstar whispered, his crystalline eyes wide with something approaching religious terror. "You cannot change what has already happened." "That's an interesting philosophical position," Chen replied, and there was genuine intellectual curiosity in her voice. "But you're operating under the assumption that what has already happened is somehow fixed or immutable. In our experience, the past is just another dimension that can be navigated and edited, much like the spatial dimensions you're familiar with." She paused, and when she continued, her tone became more educational, as if she were explaining a complex concept to students. "You see, Admiral, your species, like most we've encountered, thinks of time as a river that flows in one direction. But time is actually more like an ocean. Once you learn to swim in all directions, you can visit any point you choose and make modifications as needed." Zefkri felt his sanity beginning to fray at the edges. "You're saying you can rewrite history itself, not rewrite," Chen corrected gently. "Edit. There's a difference. When you rewrite something, you destroy the original. When you edit, you simply make improvements while preserving the essential structure. Your crews are fine, Admiral. They're just experiencing a different timeline where their ships were assigned to protect peaceful merchant vessels instead of conducting invasions." The moral implications of this revelation were staggering. If the humans could edit history, they could theoretically prevent every atrocity, every war, every moment of suffering that had ever occurred. Yet they had allowed the Calaxian Empire to conquer 17 star systems, had permitted countless civilizations to fall to various galactic powers throughout history. "Why?" Zefkri asked, the question tearing itself from his throat before he could stop it. If you can do this, why have you allowed any suffering in the galaxy? Why didn't you stop us before we conquered those other worlds? For the first time since their conversation began, Admiral Chen's expression grew sad, because intervention, without invitation, is just another form of conquest. Admiral, we learned that lesson the hard way. About 40 years ago, the view screen shifted to show what appeared to be historical footage, humans in different uniforms, younger versions of the same technology, working frantically at control stations while explosions erupted around them. We tried to be the galaxy's protectors once, Chen continued, her voice heavy with old pain. We saw suffering and decided to end it. We edited out wars, relocated entire species away from natural disasters, prevented famines and plagues across thousands of worlds. We thought we were helping. The footage showed cities being relocated, fleets being dispersed, disasters being prevented with the same casual ease they had just demonstrated. But then the images changed, showing something unexpected, civilizations collapsing not from external threats, but from within. It turns out, Chen said quietly, that struggle is an essential part of growth. When we removed all external challenges, entire species lost their will to advance, to explore, to improve themselves. We were creating a galaxy of children who never needed to learn to walk because we carried them everywhere. Zefkri watched in fascination as the footage showed thriving civilizations, slowly devolving into stagnation, their populations becoming increasingly dependent on human intervention. For even basic decisions, the breaking point came when the Zephyrian Collective asked us to edit their entire history, so they could avoid making a particular scientific discovery that had led to philosophical conflicts. Chen continued, they wanted us to make them less intelligent, less capable of independent thought, because thinking had become too difficult. The implications were horrifying. The humans had possessed godlike power and had discovered that using it benevolently was more destructive than leaving suffering alone. So we stopped, Chen said, her voice firm with resolved conviction. We established the protocol of invitation. We would only intervene when specifically asked, and only when a civilization was under immediate threat of extinction from outside forces. We wouldn't impose our help on anyone, no matter how much they might benefit from it. But you're intervening now, Vextar pointed out, his tactical mind grasping for some thread of logic in this impossible situation. Shen's smile returned, but it was different now, sadder, but also more resolved. Because Earth is our home, Sub-Admiral, we have the right to defend our own territory. And because your empire didn't just threaten us, you threatened to enslave us, to treat us as property. That crosses a line that even our non-intervention protocol doesn't protect. The tactical display chimed softly, and Zefkri's attention was drawn to a new reading. The remaining 30 ships of his fleet were still functional, but their weapons systems were showing anomalies, sir. Kixamore reported, his voice barely above a whisper. Our weapons have been modified. Modified how? Zefkri demanded. They still function perfectly, sir, but they now only produce flowers, as if to demonstrate. One of the escort vessels in the formation fired its main plasma cannon at a small asteroid. Instead of the expected destructive beam, a cascade of what appeared to be Earth daisies emerged from the weapon port, drifting gently through space in a pattern that was somehow more beautiful than any fireworks display. We thought that was a nice touch, Chen commented, apparently monitoring their weapons tests. Your crews can still practice their gunnery skills, but now they'll be contributing to the beauty of the universe instead of its destruction. The bridge fell silent except for the soft sound of Zefkri's breathing apparatus cycling. His entire worldview, built on the foundation of superior technology and overwhelming force, had crumbled in the space of minutes. The humans possessed power that made the Calaxian Empire look like children playing with toys. Yet they used that power with a restraint that was almost incomprehensible. What do you want from us? He asked finally. Shen's expression grew serious again. We want you to go home, Admiral. We want you to tell your Emperor that Earth is under protection, and that any future attempts at conquest will be met with the same response. But more than that, she paused, and when she continued, Her voice carried a note of hope that seemed to resonate across the void between their ships. "We want you to consider the possibility that there might be a better way to interact with other species than conquest. Your empire has incredible technology, rich culture, and brilliant minds. Imagine what you could accomplish if you used those gifts to build rather than destroy." The offer hung in the space between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm. But even as Zethkri considered it, he knew the real challenge was just beginning. Because somewhere in the depths of space, the Calaxian Empire's true masters were about to learn that they had just encountered something that would change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. And they were not going to be pleased. 3 days after the humiliating retreat from the Sol System, Admiral Zethkri stood in the obsidian throne room of the Calaxian High Command, facing the 5 supreme overlords who ruled the Empire with absolute authority. The chamber was deliberately intimidating walls carved from black crystal that seemed to absorb light, creating an atmosphere of suffocating darkness broken only by the pulsing red glow of the Overlord's biomechanical life support systems. Supreme Overlord Kethmuk, the eldest and most terrifying of the 5, leaned forward on his crystalline throne. His voice was like grinding stone, each word carrying the weight of countless conquered worlds. "You returned to us with 30 ships, Admiral. You departed with 300. Explain this discrepancy." Zethkri had rehearsed this moment during the entire journey home, but standing before the Supreme Overlords, he found his carefully prepared words crumbling like ash. "The humans, Supreme Overlord, they possess capabilities that our intelligence failed to detect." "Capabilities?" Overlord Vexthal's voice dripped with contempt. "What capabilities could a primitive species possibly possess that would trouble the might of the Calaxian Empire? They can edit reality itself." Supreme Overlord Zethkri replied, his voice barely steady. "They moved their entire planet to another galaxy. They changed history so that most of our fleet never arrived. They transformed our weapons into devices that produce flowers." The throne room fell silent except for the mechanical breathing of the Overlord's life support systems. Then, slowly, a sound began to build, a low rumbling that took Zethkri several moments to recognize as laughter. "Flowers?" Overlord Kixrel's voice was filled with mocking amusement. "You're telling us that the mighty Calaxian fleet was defeated by gardening implements? It sounds impossible." "I know," Zethkri pressed on desperately. "But I have the sensor logs, the crew testimonies, the falsified." Supreme Overlord Kethmuk interrupted with finality. "You encountered superior technology and, rather than adapt and overcome, you retreated. Now you fabricate impossible tales to excuse your cowardice." But even as the Supreme Overlord spoke, something strange was happening to the throne room itself. The oppressive darkness was beginning to lift, replaced by something that seemed fundamentally wrong to Calaxian senses: natural sunlight, streaming through windows that had definitely not been there moments before. Supreme Overlord Zethkri whispered, pointing at the windows with a trembling appendage. "Those weren't there before." The 5 overlords turned to follow his gaze, and for the first time in decades, expressions of genuine confusion crossed their ancient faces. Beyond the windows, instead of the familiar crimson sky of their home world, stretched a landscape of impossible beauty, rolling green hills dotted with structures that seemed to be made of living wood and crystal, all under a sky of brilliant blue. "What is this?" Overlord Vexthal demanded, his voice losing its imperious tone for the first time that Zethkri could remember. A new voice answered, familiar, calm, and utterly out of place in the throne room of the Calaxian Empire. "Good afternoon, Supreme Overlords. I apologize for the intrusion, but we need to talk." Admiral Chen materialized in the center of the throne room, not through any visible transportation technology, but simply by stepping through what appeared to be a fold in space itself. She was accompanied by 4 other humans, each wearing the same unassuming blue uniforms that somehow seemed more dignified than all the ornate regalia of the Calaxian leadership. "Impossible." Supreme Overlord Kethmuk snarled, his biomechanical systems flaring with defensive energy. "This chamber is protected by quantum shielding, temporal stabilizers, and reality anchors. Nothing can simply appear here." "Your defenses are quite impressive," Chen agreed politely. glancing around the transformed throne room with what seemed like genuine appreciation. But they're designed to protect against conventional threats. We're not exactly conventional. She gestured to the windows, and as she did, the view beyond them shifted to show not just the peaceful landscape, but the entire Galaxian capital city, except it was different. The brutal architecture of conquest had been softened, towers of black metal now sprouting gardens, monuments to war replaced by fountains, and parks where Galaxian children played under trees that had definitely not existed that morning. We've made some adjustments to your home world, Chen continued conversationally, nothing harmful, but we thought it needed a more nurturing atmosphere. The ecological improvements alone should extend the average lifespan of your population by about 30%. Overlord Kixrel rose from his throne, his forearms spreading in a gesture of supreme authority. You dare to invade our sacred homeworld? You dare to alter our domain without permission? Actually, said one of Chen's companions, a young woman with short dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold starlight, we're not invading. We're renovating. There's a difference. She waved her hand casually, and suddenly the throne room was filled with the sound of construction, but not the harsh, mechanical noise of Galaxian industry. Instead, it was the gentle sound of growth, of stone and metal being convinced to reshape themselves into more harmonious forms. My name is Dr. Sarah Kim, the young woman continued, and I'm what you might call a reality architect. We've been studying your empire for some time, and we've identified several inefficiencies in your approach to governance. Supreme Overlord Kethmek's voice rose to a roar that shook the crystals. In the walls, we have ruled this galaxy for 10,000 years. We have conquered 17 systems. We are the apex of evolutionary development. And yet, Chen said quietly, your population is dying. The throne room fell silent. We've run the projections, Chen continued, her voice gentle but inexorable. Your conquest-based economy is unsustainable. Each new world you conquer requires more resources to maintain than it produces. Your population is declining because your culture glorifies death in battle over life and growth. Within the centuries, the Galaxian Empire will collapse under its own weight. She gestured, and the air above them filled with holographic displays, showing complex mathematical models, population curves, resource allocation charts, all painted in the stark red of inevitable decline. Unless, Dr. Kim added, you make some changes. What kind of changes? Overlord Vexthal asked, his voice betraying the first hint of genuine curiosity that Zethkri had ever heard from him. The kind that your people will hate at first, Chen admitted. We want to help you transition from an empire of conquest to a civilization of creation. We want to show you how to build rather than destroy, how to grow rather than consume. A third human stepped forward, an older man with silver hair and kind eyes. My name is Professor Marcus Thompson, and I'm a cultural anthropologist. We've studied the histories of 73 different spacefaring civilizations, and we've found that the most successful ones, the ones that survive and thrive for millions of years, are those that learn to find purpose in creation rather than destruction. He gestured, and the displays in the air shifted to show thriving civilizations. Their cities works of art, their technologies focused on enhancement rather than annihilation. Your people have incredible potential, Thompson continued. Your biotechnology is centuries ahead of anything we've seen. Your architectural capabilities are extraordinary. Your mathematical understanding of quantum mechanics is simply brilliant. But you've been using all of these gifts to perfect the art of war instead of the art of living. Supreme Overlord Kethmek's biomechanical systems were cycling rapidly, processing this information with what appeared to be growing agitation. You speak of changing our fundamental nature. We are warriors. We are conquerors. It is what we are. No, Chen said firmly, it's what you've chosen to become, and choices can be changed. She turned to address all 5 overlords directly. We're offering you something unprecedented in galactic history, a complete societal transformation, guided by beings who have already made the journey from destruction to creation. We'll help you restructure your economy, retrain your population, and redirect your incredible capabilities toward building something beautiful, instead of tearing down what others have built. And if we refuse, Overlord Kixrel asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Then you'll continue down the path you're already on," Chen replied sadly. "Your empire will collapse within centuries, your people will face extinction, and the galaxy will lose one of its most remarkable civilizations." The throne room fell silent again, but this time it was the silence of consideration rather than shock. For the first time in their ancient lives, the supreme overlords of the Calaxian Empire were being offered a choice that didn't involve conquest or death. "You would help us?" Supreme Overlord Kethmik asked finally, his voice carrying a note of wonder that seemed alien coming from his mechanical throat. "Even after we tried to enslave your people." Chen's smile was warm and genuine, especially because of that. "Redemption is one of the most beautiful things in the universe, Supreme Overlord, and everyone deserves a chance at it." But even as she spoke, Admiral Zethgri noticed something troubling in the readings from his personal scanner. The changes to their home world, the transformation of their capital city, the presence of the humans in their most secure facility, it was all happening too easily, too smoothly, as if the humans had been planning this for far longer than the 3 days since the encounter at Earth. As if they had been manipulating events from the very beginning. And in the depths of space, something vast and ancient was beginning to stir, something that had been watching the galaxy for eons, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The humans' intervention in Calaxian affairs had triggered something that even their reality editing abilities might not be able to control. The revelation came not through dramatic announcements or cosmic upheavals, but through a simple question asked by the youngest member of Admiral Chen's team, Dr. Elena Vasquez, a quantum consciousness specialist who appeared to be barely out of her 20s, tilted her head with the curious expression of someone who had just noticed something profoundly wrong. "Admiral," she said quietly, her voice cutting through the ongoing negotiations between the humans and the Calaxian overlords. "We have a problem." Chen turned from her conversation with Supreme Overlord Kethmik, who had been examining holographic projections of possible agricultural improvements to Calaxian colony worlds. "What kind of problem, Elena?" "The kind where we're not actually here," Dr. Vasquez replied, her words causing every being in the transformed throne room to freeze. "According to my consciousness mapping equipment, we're all still on Earth. All of us, including the Calaxians." Admiral Zethgri felt his four stomachs drop simultaneously. "What do you mean we're still on Earth? I can see my homeworld through those windows. I can feel the gravitational pull of our twin moons." Dr. Vasquez held up a device that resembled a crystalline flower, its petals pulsing with soft light. "This is a quantum consciousness tracker. It maps the actual location of awareness in spacetime, regardless of what our senses tell us. According to this, none of us have moved from Earth's surface since the initial contact 3 days ago. The implications crashed over them like a collapsing star." Professor Thompson, the cultural anthropologist, was the first to voice what they were all thinking. "If we're all still on Earth, then what exactly have we been experiencing?" "A simulation," Chen said quietly, her face pale with growing realization. "But not one created by us." As if summoned by her words, the reality around them began to shift and blur. Like a hologram losing focus, the transformed throne room, the beautiful landscape beyond the windows, even the sensation of breathing Calaxian atmosphere, all of it wavered and dissolved, revealing something that made every being present question their understanding of existence itself. They were standing in what appeared to be a vast library, its shelves stretching impossibly high into darkness above and extending beyond the horizon in all directions. But these weren't books on the shelves, they were living scenes, each one showing different moments in galactic history, playing out in endless loops like preserved memories. And sitting at a simple wooden desk in the center of this impossible space was a figure that appeared to be human, but whose eyes held the depth of eons, and whose presence seemed to bend reality around itself, simply by existing. "My apologies for the deception," the figure said, rising from its chair with fluid grace, "but I needed to observe how both of your species would react to the possibility of redemption and transformation. The results have been illuminating." Admiral Chen stepped forward, her military bearing intact despite the cosmic impossibility of their surroundings. "Who are you?" "I am the curator," the figure replied. And somehow they all knew that this was not a title, but a fundamental description of its nature. "I have been watching over this galaxy for approximately 4 million years, documenting the rise and fall of civilizations, preserving their histories, and occasionally intervening when the story becomes too tragic to bear." The curator gestured to the shelves around them, and suddenly the scenes they contained became visible in startling detail. The rise and fall of the Zephyrian Collective, the golden age of the Andromedan Republic, the tragic extinction of the crystalline communes, thousands of civilizations, their entire histories preserved in living memory. "You see," the curator continued, beginning to walk among the shelves, "I have learned something disturbing about the nature of sapient evolution. Most species follow a predictable pattern. They achieve interstellar travel. They encounter other civilizations. They engage in conflict, and eventually they either conquer or are conquered. Very few ever break this cycle." Supreme Overlord Kethmik, his biomechanical systems struggling to process their transformed environment, managed to speak. "The humans broke the cycle. They developed the ability to edit reality itself." The curator's smile was both sad and knowing. "Did they? Or did I help them develop it?" The question hung in the air like a sword suspended by a thread. Admiral Chen's eyes widened as the implications became clear. "You're saying you gave us our abilities, not gave," the curator corrected gently. "Guided. 50 years ago when humanity first began to understand the connection between consciousness and quantum mechanics. I provided inspiration, a few key insights delivered through dreams, a handful of mathematical breakthroughs that seemed to come from nowhere, some fortuitous accidents in research that weren't accidents at all." Dr. Vasquez stepped forward, her scientific curiosity overriding her shock. "But why? Why interfere with our development?" "Because," the curator said, turning to face her directly, "I was tired of watching civilizations destroy themselves. I wanted to create something new, a species that could serve as shepherds for others, guiding them away from the cycle of conquest and towards something more meaningful." The curator gestured, and one of the shelves slid forward, revealing scenes of humanity's recent history, but not the history they remembered. In these scenes, human civilization had collapsed in the early 21st century, consumed by war, environmental destruction, and social fragmentation. "This is what would have happened without my intervention," the curator explained. "Humanity would have joined the long list of species that achieved great potential, but destroyed themselves before they could realize it. I couldn't bear to add another tragedy to my collection." Admiral Zefkri felt a strange mixture of relief and betrayal. So the humans' abilities, their wisdom, their restraint, it was all artificial. "No," the curator said firmly, "the abilities were enhanced, but the wisdom and restraint are entirely human. I could give them the power to edit reality, but I couldn't give them the moral framework to use it responsibly. That they developed on their own, through trial and error, through the painful lessons of their early interventions." Professor Thompson, ever the anthropologist, asked the question that was forming in all their minds. "What about our current situation? Was the encounter between Earth and the Calaxian Empire orchestrated?" The curator's expression grew complex. "Partially. I knew the Calaxian Empire was approaching collapse, and I knew humanity was ready for their next test. I may have influenced your intelligence reports, Admiral Zethkri, to make Earth seem like an easy target. The throne room, or rather, the library that had always been their true location, fell silent except for the whisper of pages turning in the endless shelves around them. "But here's what you need to understand," the curator continued, his voice taking on a weight that seemed to press against their consciousness. "The test isn't over. What you've all experienced today, the demonstration of power, the offer of redemption, the possibility of transformation, it was real. Your reactions, your choices, your capacity for growth, all of that was genuine." Admiral Chen looked around at her team, then at the Calaxian leaders. "What happens now?" "Now," the curator said, "you get to choose. I can return you all to your original positions, with the knowledge that the encounter never really happened. The Calaxian Empire can continue its trajectory toward collapse, and humanity can continue its isolated development." Or he paused, and in that pause, Possibilities seem to crystallize in the air around them. Or you can choose to make the simulation reality. The humans can truly develop the abilities they demonstrated. The Galaxians can truly be offered redemption and transformation. The galaxy can truly be shepherded towards something better than endless cycles of conquest and destruction. Supreme Overlord Kethmek's biomechanical systems were cycling rapidly. As he processed this information, "You're offering us a choice between comfortable lies and difficult truths. I'm offering you a choice between stagnation and growth," the curator corrected, "between safety and significance, between being subjects in my collection and being authors of your own stories." Dr. Vasquez raised her hand tentatively. "What about you? What happens to your role as curator if we choose to become active participants in galactic history?" The curator's smile was the most human expression he had yet shown. "That, my dear doctor, is the most beautiful part of this entire experiment. If you choose to take responsibility for guiding galactic civilization towards something better, then I can finally do what I've wanted to do for a million years." He gestured to the endless shelves around them, and for the first time, they could see that each preserved civilization was not just a record, but a prison, countless species trapped in their final moments, neither growing nor dying, simply existing in perpetual stasis. "I can let them all go," the curator whispered. "I can release every civilization I've preserved, give them the chance to grow beyond their final moments, to learn from their mistakes and try again. The galaxy can become truly alive for the first time in eons." The weight of the decision settled over them like a blanket of stars. In choosing to accept the power and responsibility of shepherding galactic civilization, they would not only be transforming themselves, they would be giving freedom to millions of preserved species, allowing the galaxy to truly flourish for the first time in its history. Admiral Chen looked at her team, then at the Galaxian leaders, then back at the curator. "We need to discuss this." "Of course," the curator replied. "Take all the time you need. But remember, in here, in this space between realities, time moves differently. When you make your choice, it will be as if no time has passed at all in the outside universe." As the humans and Galaxians began to gather in small groups, their voices low with the weight of cosmic responsibility, Admiral Zethkri found himself staring at the endless shelves of preserved civilizations. Somewhere in those living memories were the stories of every species that had ever reached for the stars, every dream that had ever been born under alien suns, every hope that had ever been crushed by the cycle of conquest and war. The choice they were making wasn't just about their own species, it was about giving the entire galaxy a chance to dream again. And in the depths of that vast library, surrounded by the whispers of history and the promise of an unprecedented future, they began to understand that some choices are too important to make quickly, but too urgent to delay forever.